All right, so are you ready for this? Trump's latest statement on Gaza. I mean, it has the whole world like, what is going on?
Mm.
He suggested that the U.S. take control after like displacing Palestinians. I mean, that's not exactly the usual, America stands with Israel no matter what that we're used to hearing, is it?
Yeah, no, it's definitely shaking things up. And what's really striking is the intensity of the reaction here in the U.S. It's not just from the usual critics, but from across the political spectrum.
Yeah, it feels like everyone's kind of scrambling to figure out what this even means. So today we are diving deep into the fallout, not to pick sides, but to really understand like the why, the how, and the what the heck comes next.
Well, the initial wave of outrage was pretty impossible to miss.
Oh, absolutely. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, she went straight for the jugular. She said, quote, Palestinians are not going anywhere. Forget it, Umar. Forget it. Trump Palestinians will not go anywhere. And she didn't stop there. She called it a blatant call for ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, and that really set the tone for the kind of condemnations we've been seeing from other U.S. politicians. It's not just about disagreement. It's being framed as a fundamental, like, moral and humanitarian crisis.
Right. And it goes beyond just saying this is bad policy.
Yeah.
Senator Chris Van Hollen, for example, also used that term ethnic cleansing,
Yeah.
placing this squarely in the realm of human rights violations and not just political maneuvering.
And then you have someone like Senator Chris Murphy from Trump's own party saying that Trump has lost his mind.
Okay, that one did make me chuckle, I'll admit. But it also reveals how deeply unsettling this proposal is, even to those who might usually align with Trump. It's like even his supporters are struggling to kind of reconcile this with anything they've seen before.
And to grasp the full weight of this controversy, though, we need to look at the historical context.
All right, so back it up for us. What is it about Gaza that makes this so explosive? Help us understand why everyone's freaking out.
Well, Gaza has been a point of conflict for decades. It's been under Israeli occupation since 1967, a consequence of the war that displaced a massive Palestinian population. And analyst John Alterman really gets into the complexities of that displacement and how it created the refugee crisis that continues to this day.
So we're not talking about some empty plot of land here. This is a place with a deep history, and that history is directly tied to the people being told they might have to leave.
Exactly. And to add another layer of complexity, the International Court of Justice has actually ruled that Gaza is still considered occupied territory under international law, meaning Israel's control there is legally questionable.
Hold on. So Trump is suggesting that the U.S. take over a place that's already at the center of this huge legal and humanitarian debate. Talk about walking into a minefield.
That's putting it mildly. And let's not forget the two-state solution, the idea of Israel and Palestine coexisting peacefully. That's been the goal for decades of diplomacy. Rola Jibril, a professor at the University of Miami, said this proposal effectively makes that solution impossible.
Yeah, she called it the end of any hope for a two-state solution. It's clear that the implications here are massive, not just for Palestinians, but for the stability of the entire region. And now the U.S. is potentially wading right into the middle of it all.
Now let's shift gears a bit. Beyond the moral outrage, which is obviously significant, the logistics of this proposal are mind-boggling. We're talking about the potential displacement of 2 million people.
Okay, let's say purely hypothetically this crazy plan goes ahead. Where are 2 million people supposed to go?
That's the 2 million person question, and no one seems to have a good answer. Our sources indicate that no Arab states are willing or even capable of absorbing that many refugees.
Which really throws a wrench in the whole plan, right?
Yeah.
Where do these people go? It's not like there's some magical empty space waiting for them.
Exactly. And Jonathan Panikoff, a former U.S. intelligence official, went on record saying that this would require thousands of U.S. troops on the ground, potentially for decades, to even attempt to manage the situation.
Whoa. And that clashes big time with the whole bring our troops home sentiment that's been building in the U.S. for years. It's hard to imagine the American public being on board with sending thousands of soldiers into this kind of chaos, especially when there are so many other issues we're already grappling with.
Which leads to another intriguing aspect of this whole situation. Remember the source mentioned that Americans are already deeply unhappy with the current economic situation?
Right. Things aren't exactly rosy right now.
And with that in mind, some analysts are starting to view this Gaza proposal as a distraction tactic.
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Like, hey, look over here's this crazy Gaza thing. Don't mind the economy tanking over there.
Precisely. It raises the question, what's the real motivation behind this proposal? Is it a genuine attempt to solve a complex problem, or is there something else at play?
And it's not just some random commentator saying this. Senator Murphy went so far as to suggest there might be something even shadier going on, hinting that certain billionaires might be looking to exploit this situation for their own gain.
Which brings us to the age-old question. Cui bono? Who benefits? If it's not about morality and it's logistically impossible, then what's the real endgame here?
All right, so we've got global outrage, logistical nightmares, whispers of ulterior motives. This is starting to feel like a political thriller, and we're only just getting started. What else is out there?
Well, now it gets even more interesting. Congressman Jake Auchincloss has a different theory, and it's even more audacious than the distraction idea.
Okay, lay it on us. What's Auchincloss thinking?
He told News Nation that this isn't about distraction, it's about potential profiteering. He suggests, and I quote, that Trump and Jared Kushner might be trying to turn Gaza into resorts.
Wait, resorts?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
vacation destinations?
That's exactly what he's implying. And let's be real, the audacity of that claim, given the humanitarian crisis and ongoing conflict, is just mind-boggling. It's almost too outlandish to consider. But then again, we are talking about Trump.
Right. Never a dull moment with that guy. Okay, so we've got outrage, logistical chaos, potential corruption, and now the possibility of like beachside condos amidst a war zone. This is wild. But what about the rest of the world? How is all of this playing on the global stage?
The international angle. That's where things get really fascinating. Our sources point to Jordan as a potential flashpoint. They're already dealing with a lot of internal tension, and a sudden influx of Palestinian refugees would push them towards instability.
And that's not good for anyone, least of all. The U.S., Jordan's a key ally in the region, and their collapse would have huge ripple effects.
Absolutely. The sources are pretty clear that U.S. interests would be at serious risk if Jordan were to destabilize.
Okay, so Jordan's worried. U.S. allies are worried. What about the global media? What are they saying about this whole Gaza bombshell?
Well, the reactions have been overwhelmingly negative. The Washington Post called it costly and deadly. The Guardian went even further, using the term ethnic cleansing to describe it. And Le Monde, the prominent French newspaper, declared that Trump doesn't care about history.
Wow. Those are some serious accusations. Even for Trump, who's no stranger to controversy, this seems to have struck a nerve globally.
And here's where it gets even more complex. Even Israeli media is skeptical. Haaretz, a leading Israeli newspaper, is suggesting that this might be less about helping Israel and more about throwing a political lifeline to Netanyahu, who's been struggling to hold on to power lately.
So maybe this isn't about what's best for Israel at all, but what's best for Netanyahu's political career. That adds a whole other layer to this, doesn't it?
It certainly complicates the narrative. We're not just dealing with a straightforward policy proposal here. There are layers of political maneuvering, both domestic and international, at play.
My head is spinning. This is way more than just another Trump controversy. This one proposal has the potential to upend everything. U.S. foreign policy, international relations, the future of the two-state solution. It's a lot to unpack.
It is indeed a fascinating and deeply unsettling situation. And we're not done yet. There's still a lot more to explore.
All right, so we've got this tangled web of global outrage and logistical nightmares and potential backroom deals.
Yeah.
But I keep coming back to this question of why. What's the real objective here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And there are a few different schools of thought on that. Some see this as a classic Trumpian power play, a way to assert dominance on the world stage and distract from domestic issues.
But if it's just a distraction, why something this radical? This isn't like tweeting an insult. This is proposing a massive upheaval of the entire region.
Exactly. And that's why some analysts are digging deeper, looking beyond that surface-level explanation of distraction. They're pointing to the potential for financial gains specifically for Trump and his inner circle.
You're talking about that resorts comment from Congressman Auchincloss, right? I still can't get over that one. Turning Gaza into a tourist destination. Seriously.
It does sound outlandish, I'll grant you that. But Auchincloss wasn't just speculating. He was drawing on Trump's history of real estate dealings and his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's deep involvement in Middle Eastern affairs.
Okay, so there's a possible financial incentive. But wouldn't that be incredibly risky? I mean, if we're talking about investing in a region that's basically a powder keg.
Risky, yes, but potentially lucrative as well. Remember, Gaza has a coastline. There's the potential for development, for tourism, for all sorts of ventures that could line the right pockets.
But at what cost? We're already seeing the potential for instability in Jordan, a key U.S. ally, and the global media is having a field day with this, painting the U.S. in a very negative light.
You're absolutely right. The Washington Post, for example, went so far as to say that this proposal could have deadly consequences. And they weren't alone. The Guardian used the term ethnic cleansing, which is a very serious accusation.
It's not just the usual suspects either. Le Monde, a highly respected French newspaper, basically said that Trump is ignoring history and acting recklessly. It's clear that this has touched a nerve internationally.
And what's even more interesting is that the skepticism isn't limited to the usual critics of U.S. foreign policy. Even within Israel, there are doubts about Trump's true intentions.
Yeah. You mentioned Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper. What exactly are they saying?
They're suggesting that this might be more about propping up Netanyahu than actually helping Israel build. Netanyahu's been facing some serious political challenges lately, and this could be a way for Trump to bolster his ally.
So maybe this whole thing is just a giant political chess game. A way for Trump to flex his muscles on the world stage, help out a friend, and maybe even make a quick buck in the process.
It's certainly a possibility, but it's important to remember that we're dealing with a lot of speculation here. We don't have concrete evidence of any wrongdoing, and we need to be careful not to jump to conclusions.
Fair enough. But even if we can't say for sure what the motives are, the potential consequences are undeniable. We're talking about a proposal that could lead to mass displacement, regional instability, and a further erosion of U.S. credibility on the world stage.
And that's why the story is so compelling. It forces us to grapple with these complex questions of power morality and the unintended consequences of political actions. Even if this proposal never actually comes to fruition, the fact that it was even put forward raises serious concerns about the direction of U.S. foreign policy.
It's like looking into a crystal ball and seeing a whole range of possible futures, none of them particularly good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that uncertainty is what makes the situation so unnerving. We're in uncharted territory here, and there's no telling how this is going to play out.
So what do we do? How do we make sense of all this?
Well, I think the first step is to acknowledge the complexity of the situation. We're not dealing with a simple good versus evil narrative here. There are multiple perspectives, multiple motivations, and multiple potential outcomes.
And that means resisting the temptation to oversimplify things, to jump to easy conclusions. We need to be willing to grapple with the nuances, to consider the unintended consequences, and to be open to the possibility that we don't have all the answers.
Exactly. It's about asking the right questions, even if those questions don't have easy answers.
All right, so what questions should we be asking? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think one crucial question is, what are the potential long-term consequences of this proposal, even if it never actually comes to pass?
Because even if the U.S. doesn't actually take control of Gaza, the mere suggestion has already caused a lot of damage.
Precisely. The trust has been broken, the relationships have been strained, and the potential for violence has increased. Those are very real consequences that we need to grapple with regardless of what happens next.
It's like a ripple effect spreading outward from this one seemingly isolated event.
Yeah.
And it's hard to know where those ripples will end up.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to keep asking those tough questions, and to be willing to engage in thoughtful dialogue about these complex issues.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all of this.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin to process this?
I think it's helpful to break it down into smaller, more manageable questions. For example, what does this proposal tell us about the current state of U.S. foreign policy? What are the underlying assumptions driving this kind of decision-making?
And what are the potential implications for the future of the two-state solution? Is that even still a viable option at this point?
These are all important questions that we need to be asking ourselves, and there are no easy answers.
It feels like we've gone down this rabbit hole and emerged into a world that's somehow even more complicated than the one we left behind.
That's the nature of deep dives, isn't it? They challenge our assumptions, expand our understanding, and sometimes leave us with more questions than answers. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's a reminder that the world is a complex place and there's always more to learn.
So what are some of the key takeaways you think our listeners should walk away with? What's the big picture here?
Well, I think one of the most important takeaways is that this is not just about Trump being Trump. There are deeper forces at play here, forces that have been shaping U.S. foreign policy for decades.
Right, this isn't just some random event. It's part of a larger pattern.
Exactly. And understanding that pattern is crucial if we want to make sense of what's happening in the world today.
So if we zoom out a bit, what does this whole situation tell us about the state of global politics right now?
Well, I think it highlights the growing sense of instability and uncertainty in the world. The old rules no longer seem to apply, and the traditional power structures are being challenged.
And that's a scary thought. It feels like we're standing on the edge of something unknown, something potentially dangerous.
It's certainly a time of great change and upheaval, but it's also a time of great opportunity.
Opportunity? How so?
Well, when the old systems break down, it creates space for new ideas, new solutions, new ways of thinking about the world.
So maybe this chaos isn't necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's a chance for us to reimagine the world, to create something better, something more just and equitable.
That's certainly a possibility, but it's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of dialogue, and a lot of willingness to challenge our assumptions.
Well, I'm ready for the challenge.
Yeah.
Are you?
I am indeed. And I think our listeners are too.
Yeah, I think a lot of our listeners are probably feeling that tension, right?
Yeah.
Between the chaos and the opportunity. It's this crazy proposal, but it's making us think bigger about what's going on in the world.
Yeah, and that's precisely the point of a deep dive. This isn't it. It's not about giving you easy answers, but about equipping you with the context and the critical thinking skills to navigate a world that's getting more complex by the day.
So as we're kind of wrapping up here, I'm curious, for someone trying to make sense of this, what should they be paying attention to in the coming weeks and months? What are the signs that things are going one way or another with this whole Gaza situation?
Excellent question. First, I'd say keep an eye on the reactions from other countries, not just the usual allies of the U.S. Are Arab states starting to formulate a unified response? What's the tone coming from Europe? These early signals can tell us a lot about how much international pressure the U.S. might face.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well,
it's easy to get caught up in the U.S. news cycle, but this has global implications for sure.
Absolutely. Second, watch how the U.S. Congress responds. Will this embolden those already critical of Trump's foreign policy? Could this even lead to new legislative action trying to rein in his power in this area? That'll be a key indicator how much pushback he might get domestically.
All right, so Congress, international reactions, what else? I got to admit, I'm still kind of stuck on the humanitarian aspect. What happens to the people of Gaza if this even remotely goes forward?
You're right to focus on that. Sadly, that's often where the spotlight fades fastest. Pay attention to reports from human rights organizations operating on the ground. They'll be the first to sound the alarm if conditions worsen, if aid is disrupted, or if any moves towards displacement actually start happening.
Okay, so we got the big geopolitical stuff, but also the on-the-ground reality for people living this every day. It's a lot to keep track of.
It is, but it's also crucial. Because remember, even if this specific proposal fizzles out the underlying issues, the conflict, the occupation, the humanitarian crisis, those don't just vanish.
Right. So what's the final takeaway then for our listeners? It can't just be pay attention to everything forever.
Here's the provocative thought I'll leave you with. If this wasn't a practical plan, and maybe wasn't even meant to be, what does it tell us about the use of power in today's world? Is this a sign that shocking proposals are the new normal? A way to force reactions rather than seek solutions? Something to ponder as you follow the news unfolding.
Whoa. Okay, so this isn't just about Gaza. It's about how decisions get made, how the global game is changing. My head is officially spinning, but in a good way.
That's what we aim for on the deep dive, not just to inform, but to equip you to think critically about the world around you.
Well said. And to our listeners, thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep those questions coming, stay curious, and we'll catch you next time.